The sky cracked open that morning, not with thunder or fire, but with silence. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you, thick, heavy, like the breath you hold before a storm breaks. The kind of silence that tells you everything's about to change. For decades, we'd watched the stars with unease. We knew they were coming, but no one could have imagined how. It began with a shimmer in the atmosphere, a subtle ripple like the surface of a pond disturbed by a single stone. A faint pulse, barely detectable, stretched across Earth's orbit. Then the sky itself bent. Not visibly, not like a comet blazing through the heavens, but the fabric of reality twisted, folded inward, as if the universe was exhaling. And in that moment, humanity understood. We weren't alone. We were being watched. The first warning came from the International Space Station, a piercing flash of light, followed by a cascade of electromagnetic interference that knocked every satellite offline. For hours, the world plunged into darkness. Communication faltered, cities blinked out, and somewhere deep beneath the surface, in command centers and bunkers, people waited for what came next. Then came the ships. No one knew where they came from, not from Mars, not from the asteroid belt, not even from beyond Pluto. They simply appeared, monoliths of metal and shadow, drifting into Earth's orbit like harbingers of something older than time. Their shapes were alien, geometry that defied human understanding, facets that glimmered with unnatural light. And though they made no sound, their presence screamed. Humanity's response was instinct, not strategy, not politics, but survival. Nations that once bled each other dry now fought side by side, united by a singular truth. If we didn't stand together, we would fall alone. Weapons that had never left museums were dusted off. Missiles long buried were reactivated. Soldiers were called from homes and farms, from schools and factories. In the heart of what was once New York City, now a sprawling command hub known as Fort Unity, a young captain named Alara Voss stood before a panoramic viewport. The sky was no longer blue. It was a swirling canvas of gray and orange, torn by the shadow of the alien vessels. Her jaw was clenched, eyes steady. Behind her, the hum of strategists and technicians filled the room, voices tense but determined. Alara knew this was not just a battle for Earth. It was a battle for humanity itself. The first attack came without warning. The monoliths unfolded like blooming steel flowers, revealing weapons that bent physics and shattered reality. Cities burned in seconds. Defense systems melted under beams that sliced through armor and bone alike. And yet, amidst the devastation, humans fought back, with grit, with desperation, with an unyielding spark that refused to be snuffed out. Alara's unit was tasked with defending the Bastion, a massive underground facility housing the world's remaining leadership and critical technology. It was a fortress carved from the bedrock beneath the Rockies, safe from orbital bombardment, but not from what lurked above. On the surface, the alien forces launched relentless waves of assault drones and biomechanical soldiers, each more terrifying than the last. Creatures that seemed born from nightmare, with eyes that glowed like dying stars and limbs that moved with deadly grace. The defenders' response was brutal. Explosions echoed through the mountain's veins. Gunfire lit the tunnels with staccato bursts of defiance. Each lost comrade was a wound, but also a fuel. Alara moved through the chaos with calm purpose, rallying her troops with quiet words. Hold the line. Hold each other. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. It gave strength when hope was a scarce commodity. Outside, the battle raged through the night. Fire painted the sky red. Machines clashed with flesh and bone in a deadly dance. And somewhere in the distance, a deep, resonant hum began to rise. Not from any human source, not from the invaders, but from beneath the earth. A tremor ran through the facility. Then another, deeper, stronger. A sound like the heartbeat of a giant waking from slumber. Alara's calm crackled. The voice on the other end was tight with urgency. Captain Voss, you need to see this. She followed the command link to the central command chamber. There, a massive display flickered to life. The source of the hum appeared, a colossal figure rising from the depths, coated in armor that seemed grown, not forged. Its movements were deliberate, slow, as if testing its limbs after a long sleep. It was not human, but it was ours. The machine was called Goliath. Built decades earlier in secret, a last-ditch effort by scientists desperate to create a weapon that could turn the tide of any future war. A sentinel forged from every fear and hope humanity carried. Its presence was a paradox, terrifying and awe-inspiring. A reminder that sometimes salvation wears a face carved from steel and fire. Alara watched as Goliath took its first steps. Earth trembled beneath its weight, and the alien forces paused. Recognition or fear etched into their silent advance. For the first time, the tide shifted. It was no longer just humans fighting. It was humanity's spirit given form. The battle that followed was unlike any before. Goliath tore through enemy ranks with a power that was almost primal. Fists like wrecking balls, a chest that pulsed with a strange, blue energy. Each strike echoed a message. We are not done. Behind the mechanical titan, soldiers surged forward, inspired, fueled by a hope reborn. But the victory was not without cost. The battle claimed thousands. Alara herself bore wounds she hid beneath the armor's cold surface. Yet, in those scars, she found something sacred, proof that even in destruction, there is life, that from the darkest moments, courage blooms. As dawn broke over the ravaged landscape, Alara stood once more before the viewport. The sky was no longer just gray. It held streaks of gold, a fragile promise. The fight was far from over. But in that moment, humanity had taken its first true step into the light. This was the last dawn before the storm, the moment when everything changed, the moment when humanity said, "We are here, we are still here, and we will fight." Manhattan used to be a heartbeat, a pulse in the chest of the world, lights that never went out, crowds that never slowed down. Wall Street, Broadway, Harlem Jazz. 1,000 stories woven into concrete and glass. You could feel it, living, breathing, loud. Now, it's bones, twisted steel and blackened glass, a cratered skeleton of what used to be a monument to human ambition. There's no heartbeat here anymore, only echoes. The attack was surgical, precise, and cruel. They didn't just destroy it, they peeled it, like a fruit, peeled the skin of the city back and left the core to rot. The crater stretches for miles, ground zero for whatever the architects dropped, some kind of gravity drill, or a spatial tumor, or, hell, maybe it was just art to them. What's left isn't a ruin. It's a scar on the planet. You can feel it when you get close. Like something beneath your skin is trying to crawl away. The air doesn't move right. Light bends where it shouldn't. Sounds echo when no one speaks. But down there, in the guts of old New York, something human still moved. They called themselves Echo Company. What was left of the 17th Marine Recon? Officially? Disbanded. Unofficially? Too stubborn to die. Their leader, Captain Alara Voss. She wasn't anyone famous before all this started. No medals, no viral speeches, just a soldier with sand in her boots and defiance in her bloodstream. The kind of person who doesn't wait for orders, she writes them with blood and grit. The kind of person war doesn't break, it sharpens. Her squad was living in the sewer arteries beneath the bones of Manhattan, feeding off generator fumes and rusted rations, scavenging weapons from half-melted barracks, drinking filtered rainwater through moss-lined pipes. Most people called them ghosts. Alara called them family. That morning, they picked up a signal. Weak, glitched, repeating the same burst of sound every 10 seconds. 3 clicks, a low hum, and then silence. It wasn't one of theirs. It wasn't human at all, but it was close. Alara stood in the broken shell of an old MTA terminal, dust in her eyelashes, maps spread across a cracked touchscreen tablet. Her fingers traced the transmission's origin, what used to be Times Square. She didn't speak like commanders in movies. No bravado, no rallying speeches. Just, if we don't move now, we lose the trail. Pack light, we go under. So they did. 10 of them, moving like phantoms through tunnels that used to hum with subway trains and tourists. Now, they were silent, except for the groaning of pipes, the occasional drip of poison water, and the distant, pulsing thrum of something wrong. They passed skeletons, some still in their suits, others in military gear, weapons melted to their hands. No one looked too long. That's how you lost your edge down here, by remembering what it used to be. It took 4 hours to reach the surface, another 2 to cross the upper rubble fields of Midtown. And when they finally reached the source, it was waiting, nestled in the cracked pavement of what used to be Times Square, beneath the shattered remains of a digital billboard that still blinked a half-lit shampoo ad, was something not of this world. A sphere, metallic, about the size of a human torso, hovering 3 feet above the ground. No wires, no propulsion, just floating, like it was bored of gravity. It rotated slowly, as if it was watching, even though it had no eyes. Its surface wasn't smooth, closer to coral than metal, with angles that didn't make sense unless you stopped thinking in 3 dimensions. Private Singh whispered, "Is it?" Alive? Voss didn't answer. She stepped closer, calm, deliberate, until the hum changed pitch. Higher, urgent. The squad raised their weapons. Then the ground shifted, not cracked, not exploded, just shifted, like space itself was tilting on a wrong axis. One moment they were standing in war-torn Times Square. The next, reality bent like hot wax. A rift opened, like someone had unzipped the air behind the sphere. From it poured something impossible. Architect drones. Not machines, not life. Something in between. They moved like insects, but their shapes changed as they moved. Smooth and slick, then spiked and gnashing, like they couldn't decide what form hurt more. Echo Company opened fire instantly. The firefight wasn't clean. It wasn't fair, but it was loud. Gunfire snapped and echoed through the ruins like thunder in a cathedral. Grenades turned drone clusters into clouds of black oil. Pulse charges fried the air. Voss screamed coordinates. Singh laid down suppressive fire, and Corporal Reyes went down laughing with a trigger clamped between his teeth. They fought like people with nothing left to lose. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to hurt something that thought they couldn't. At one point, a drone pinned Voss. A spear-like limb sliced through her armor and dug into her ribs. She didn't scream. She shoved her combat knife into its eye, if it had eyes, and spat blood as it reeled. She used its limp body as cover, dragged herself to the sphere, and then she did the impossible. She touched it. The moment her hand made contact, everything froze. Drone stopped mid-lunge. The air thickened, like syrup. For a second, Voss felt the weight of an entire intelligence pressing against her mind. Not words, not thoughts, just cold. And then, nothing. The drones collapsed. The rift zipped shut like a healed scar. The sphere dropped to the ground silent. Dead. Echo Company had survived. Barely. 4 out of 10 walked back into the sewers. Voss walked last, limping, covered in oil and blood. The sphere strapped to her back. They didn't talk much afterward. They just sat, breathing, bleeding, remembering what victory felt like, even a small, filthy, desperate one. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, but not from weather, from orbit. The architects had noticed, and maybe, just maybe, they were afraid. In the weeks that followed, the story of Echo Company leaked. People whispered of a woman who touched alien tech and lived. A squad that killed the unkillable in the shadow of the void. Survivors called her the Iron Ghost. Radio DJs played songs in her honor. Kids scratched her name into shelter walls. But Voss never cared about the stories. She only cared about what came next. Because the war was far from over. But for the first time since the sky fell, humanity had something new. A reason to believe we could fight back. And it all started here, in the bones of Manhattan, where the world died, and a new kind of fire was lit in its place. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 3, Firelight and Fury, to be rewritten in the same style and tone. Some stories don't begin with thunder. They don't come riding in on fire or blood. Some stories begin in silence. A broken kind of silence, the kind left behind when everything else has been taken. This one starts in Lagos, or what's left of it. Once, it was a city of color, music, energy. 20 million people stacked into every inch of life. Markets that overflowed onto the streets. Laughter that bounced off the rooftops. The air thick with food, language, and hope. Now, dust. Everything coated in it. Thick, gray, suffocating. Not like the dust of storms or deserts. This dust lingered. It came from the bones of buildings and the bodies of dreams. The architects hadn't dropped anything massive on Lagos. No spire. No orbital lance. What they'd done was worse. They'd tuned the city. That's what we started calling it, tuning. Like they'd found some hidden frequency in matter, in molecules, and changed the key. The city began to hum, subtle at first, beneath the streets, in the air. Electronics warped. Concrete shifted like soft clay. And then, people started vanishing. Not screaming, not dying, just gone. Mid-step, mid-sentence, midlife. And what they left behind turned to dust. When Recon Unit 12 touched down in Lagos, the silence was already deafening. Their boots crunched over what used to be sidewalks, now barely more than powder. No bodies, no movement, just shadows burned into walls, as if the sun had screamed once and then went cold. Captain Ortega led the squad, an old veteran with a voice like gravel and a heart that had seen too much. They were there to check for survivors. It was protocol. Even if they knew the odds were zero, you always check. They moved through hollow buildings like ghosts, listening, watching, waiting. And then, in the shell of an old shopping mall, someone heard crying. It was Private Jules who found her, buried beneath a collapsed kiosk, hidden by plastic mannequins and dust-covered toys. A girl, maybe 6, maybe younger, eyes wide, skin streaked with ash. She clutched a shattered UN helmet like it was her only anchor to the world. A child's fingers gripping something too heavy for her hands, too broken to protect anyone. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared, like she'd been waiting. Like part of her already knew no one else was coming. They tried to speak to her. In English, in Yoruba, in whispers and smiles. Nothing. Until the gunship flew overhead, low and slow, casting a long shadow across the cratered mall. It had been painted with the Resistance Phoenix, the bird in flames, wings wide and burning. And that's when the girl spoke. Quiet, clear, no hesitation. They tried to eat the sky, but the sky fought back, just like that. 6 words, like a prophecy pulled from ash. Those 6 words made it out of Lagos before the girl did. The squad recorded her, uploaded it to the Blacknet, a decentralized network of resistance feeds stitched together from old servers, salvage towers, and sheer willpower. And like wildfire, it spread, not as a battle report, not as propaganda, as proof. Proof that humanity was still down there, buried, wounded, cracked, but not broken, not erased. And most importantly, that even a child, one who had seen everything she loved turn to dust, still knew how to look up. No one knew her name. Not then. And maybe that was why she mattered so much. Because she wasn't a symbol. She wasn't manufactured hope. She wasn't a soldier or a scientist or a martyr. She was a reminder that in the midst of all this madness, in the screaming skies and burning cities and collapsing realities, there were still humans who could look into the face of something incomprehensible and say something back. Across the front lines, those 6 words became sacred. Soldiers painted them on helmets, on drone wings, on the sides of bullet-riddled tanks. They tried to eat the sky, but the sky fought back. It wasn't just a quote. It was a heartbeat. In Antarctica, a unit carved it into the snow with heat cutters. In Kazakhstan, a sniper team broadcast it before taking out an architect observer. In the Pacific, survivors shouted it into the ocean as they watched one of the spires burn and collapse into the waves. The words moved faster than strategy, faster than hope, because they were hope. Simple, fierce, human. Eventually, they got the girl out, airlifted her to a refugee arcology buried under Sierra Leone. Doctors said she was malnourished, dehydrated, likely traumatized. But she never cried, never spoke again, either. She just sat by the reinforced glass wall of her bunker room, watching the clouds above. Quiet, watching. Captain Ortega visited her once, brought her a book of drawings recovered from a school in Nigeria. Inside, kids had drawn pictures of the sky before and after. One page stood out, a phoenix, wings stretched wide. Beneath it, scribbled in shaky block letters, "The sky is angry now." Ortega left the book on her bed. She never opened it, but she smiled, just once, and that was enough. Later, the higher-ups wanted to turn her into something, a symbol, a poster child, a speechwriter's dream. But the resistance said no. They protected her, changed her name, gave her a quiet place in the Sierra stronghold. Let her be a child again, whatever that meant anymore. Because she'd already done enough. She reminded us that we weren't just fighting for revenge or territory or survival. We were fighting for the right to dream again, to let children be children, to reclaim what the architects had tried to devour. Historians called it the Lagos spark, not because of its scale. There were bigger battles. Not because of victory, Lagos was still lost, but because it ignited something. It gave us a reason, a face, a truth, that no matter how much the enemy burned, we still meant something. That humanity, fragile and furious and flawed, was still worth something. Even buried in ash, a 6-year-old girl could look at the wreckage of the world and whisper something back into the dark. And the dark listened. There's a mural now, painted on the side of the resistance bastion in what used to be Rio. It shows the girl, standing in dust, holding the cracked helmet like a torch. Behind her, flames shaped like wings. Above her, in looping strokes of blood-red paint, the sky fought back. Every new recruit walks past it. Every refugee sees it first. And every one of them, deep down, understands. This war isn't just about survival. It's about remembrance. About making sure the world knows that in the quiet places, in the dust and rubble, something human still watches the sky, and it remembers how to fight. There are places in the universe where silence doesn't just linger, it breathes. Places where sound has no meaning, where time hangs suspended like frost on glass. Europa is one of those places. A frozen moon wrapped in cracked ice and ancient secrets, drifting around Jupiter like a forgotten thought. It had always fascinated us. Scientists dreamed of the oceans beneath. Poets imagined what swam through them. But Europa was never ours. It belonged to something else long before we ever arrived. Before the war, there was a base there, Outpost Halcyon, built in defiance of budget cuts, launched on promises and caffeine and 1,000 sleepless engineers. It was humanity's farthest permanent footprint. A dozen scientists, 2 AI cores, 1 drilling platform. They were there to study what lay beneath the ice. They ended up unearthing something that wasn't meant to be found. The last transmission from Halcyon didn't include screams. It didn't include static. Just a single sentence, spoken by Dr. Lena Marlowe, voice calm as snowfall. They'd been watching since before we knew how to look. And then, nothing. For almost a year after the Earth burned, Europa stayed silent, dead. We thought Halcyon was gone, swallowed by some architect trick, or worse, converted. But then a signal flared from its orbit, encrypted, fragmented, repeating coordinates over and over like a heartbeat. No voice, no message, just numbers. And every part of the resistance leadership screamed the same thing. It's a trap. But to Captain Alaravos, it sounded like a challenge. She didn't trust the signal. She didn't believe Halcyon had somehow survived. But she also knew this war wasn't going to be won by waiting in bunkers. We had to go to them, had to drag the fight to the edges of space, even if it meant choking on vacuum and losing everything on a gamble. So we built the Peregrine. Calling it a ship would be generous. It was more like a flying scrapyard, stitched together from old colony freighters, deep-sea pressure hulls, and whatever thruster arrays we hadn't melted for scrap. It couldn't outrun a drone, couldn't cloak, barely had enough shielding to take a micrometeorite. But it had one thing going for it, a crew that didn't care. Boss handpicked them. No diplomats, no suits, just fighters and thinkers who had already buried too many friends to hesitate. A pilot with one eye and a cigarette always lit, even in zero-G. A xenobiologist who believed knowledge was a weapon sharper than any blade, and a demolitions expert who whispered to his bombs like they were children. They left Earth with no guarantee of return, but they left anyway. The journey to Europa wasn't smooth. They passed the wreckage of Mars, orbital colonies reduced to debris fields and haunted signals, past the shattered ruins of the Lunar Defense Array, still spinning silently in void like a broken jawbone, past the Architect Barricade, massive black structures orbiting Jupiter, pulsing with gravitational interference like hearts made of stone. Everyone expected to die there, expected the Peregrine to be torn apart before it even got close. But nothing happened. The architects let them pass. That was somehow worse, because it meant they wanted the crew to see what lay ahead. Europa shimmered beneath them, cold, cracked, quiet. The signal led them to Halcyon Station, or what was left of it. It floated just above the surface now, disconnected from the ice tether, its hull reshaped, warped, as if the station itself had grown bones. The docking clamps didn't work. The airlock opened on its own. No one said a word as they entered. The walls were slick with a black resin, part metal, part something else. It pulsed faintly, like veins. The lights flickered in a pattern too precise to be random. The station wasn't abandoned. It was asleep, and it was watching. They found the bodies, not rotting, not decomposed, preserved, embedded in the walls like fossils. Each face frozen mid-expression, fear, awe, serenity, as if the architects hadn't killed them. They kept them, like art. The AI cores were missing, the logs corrupted. But in the heart of the station, beneath the old science wing, they found something stranger than death. They found the ice chamber, drilled deep into Europa's crust. It had once been a lab, filled with microscopes, data consoles, heat lamps. Now it was a shrine, and in the center, suspended in a column of ice, was her, Lena Marlowe, still alive. Somehow, her body was altered, faint circuitry under her skin, veins that glowed dimly. Her eyes opened as the crew entered, but she didn't move, didn't blink, just whispered. They didn't come for war. They came to finish the test. She spoke in riddles, in bursts of memory. The crew recorded everything. What they pieced together chilled them more than any architect weapon. Europa wasn't just a target. It was a lab. The architects hadn't chosen Earth at random. They'd been watching us, measuring us, nudging us for centuries. Through dreams, through myths, through science we hadn't even invented yet. The war wasn't about conquest. It was about verdict. And Earth was the final subject. The crew had a choice. Leave the station, burn it, flee back to Earth with whatever scraps they'd found. or planned explosives in the ice chamber. Voss made the decision. She didn't say much, just looked at Marlowe, half human, half something else, and asked, "Do you want to stay?" And Marlowe, smiling faintly, whispered, "It's already inside me. Finish what I couldn't." They planted the charges. The station began to crack. The ice trembled. The power grid went haywire. The strange resin pulsed faster. And from deep beneath Europa's surface, something stirred. Something huge. They ran, back to the Peregrine, back through the void, back toward the thin blue dot in the distance that still called itself home. As Halcyon Station fell, as Europa's crust split and geysers of black fluid erupted into space, they saw it. Not a ship, not a creature, a shape, moving just beneath the ice. So massive it made the moon look hollow. And then it stopped, and the signal ended. The crew made it back, broken, changed, scarred by the cold. But what they brought with them mattered more than weapons. They brought understanding. This war wasn't one we could win through numbers or brute force. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't even about survival. It was a trial, a crucible, and the architects were watching to see if we broke or burned brighter. Alara Voss, standing in the debrief chamber back on Earth, looked up at the hologram of Europa and said, "They want to see what we'll do when we're cornered in the dark. Let's show them what fire looks like." And that quote? That became the new slogan of the resistance. Let's show them what fire looks like. It was printed on flyers, etched into rifles, scrawled in ash across the walls of fallen cities. Because after Europa, we stopped thinking of ourselves as victims. We stopped asking why us and started asking, how much can they take before we take everything back? Europa didn't give us victory, but it gave us clarity. And clarity is dangerous, because once you see the war for what it really is, you stop playing by the enemy's rules, and you start writing your own. Some signals are expected coordinates, distress calls, tactical data. Others, you don't get those twice in a lifetime. This one wasn't a warning, wasn't a cry for help. It was something worse. It was a welcome back. It started 3 weeks after the Europa mission. Earth's resistance was still reeling. The revelations from Halcyon, the truth about the war being some kind of test, rattled every military command and civilian network left standing. We weren't just fighting monsters. We were being evaluated. And then the signal came. It didn't come from space. Didn't come from an architect transmitter or a satellite array. It came from within the Earth, bounced through underground fiber cables long thought destroyed, routed through rusted routers and fossilized tech, relics from before the sky fell. A repeating pattern, ancient Morse, but faster, like a human memory trying to remember itself too quickly. At first, they thought it was corruption, data noise, but then someone slowed it down, decoded it, and what they found made every resistance leader sit up in silence. Project Goliath status, unknown. Reawakening incomplete. Contingency engaged. Reconnect sequence initiated. Estimated surface breach, 11 days. Location, Black Mesa. Black Mesa, a name that hadn't been spoken in decades. A black site buried so deep in Nevada that even its myths had faded. The kind of place where conspiracies go to die, where files were shredded before they were written. Most people didn't believe it had ever really existed, and if it did, it was supposed to be shut down before most of the current resistance fighters were even born. But it was real, and it had woken up. Captain Alara Voss got the message while overseeing reconstruction efforts in what used to be Cairo. She didn't hesitate. No debate. No delay. Just 3 words spoken into the calm. "We're going dark." Her team knew what that meant. No broadcasts. No trails. No support. If it went sideways, no one was coming for them. They boarded a VTOL stitched together from carbon fiber and old jetliner wings and vanished into the wind. Black Mesa wasn't easy to find, not because it was hidden, but because it was forgotten. The desert had swallowed it whole. Sand dunes had climbed over its ventilation shafts like tombstones. The entry lifts had rusted shut. Entire control panels had melted into rock from whatever energy had been left humming inside. But the signal didn't lie, because the moment they got close, the ground breathed. Literally, a gust of hot air pulsed up from beneath the dunes. Dry, metallic, wrong. And when they traced it to the source, a vent shaft the size of a missile silo, lights flickered on. Not modern lights, old halogens, warm, yellow, human. And one word began blinking on a screen long buried in sand. Welcome. What they found inside was a place out of time. Black Mesa hadn't just been buried. It had been preserved. Rows of terminals running off reactors that hadn't seen sunlight in 40 years. Robotics still twitching in idle loops. Entire labs sealed airtight, filled with dead scientists who'd never aged, frozen in emergency lockdown. But the strangest thing wasn't what was broken. It was what still worked. There were lights, functioning servers, voice logs still playing on repeat. And in the center of it all, a chamber the size of a cathedral. Inside was Goliath. No one had seen it in person, not even in photographs. Goliath wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a promise, a last-ditch failsafe, built during the Cold War, funded by the kind of fear that comes with mushroom clouds and existential dread, engineered by minds that no longer existed, using technology we still couldn't reverse engineer. It stood 25 meters tall, humanoid in shape, but wrong in posture, arms like bridge pylons, a chest built around something humming with impossible energy. No face, just a black visor that hadn't flickered since before most of the world knew what the word architect meant. And yet, it was awake. Its systems were slow, cold, like blood starting to flow after decades in ice. But it was alive. The crew's engineer, Malik, ran diagnostics with shaking hands. Every reading came back wrong. This thing isn't powered by fission or fusion. It's reacting to something outside time. I don't even know what I'm looking at. But Voss wasn't interested in how it worked. She was only interested in why it woke up now. And she got her answer in the AI chamber. A voice, male, calm, old, crackling through analog speakers. Contingency theta. Activation conditions met. Hostile incursion confirmed. Humanity assessment in progress. Goliath will respond. It wasn't a full AI, just a voice print interface. Pre-recorded decisions strung together by algorithms. But the intent was clear. Goliath was built to awaken if Earth ever faced an extinction-level invasion. It wasn't meant to serve humans. It was meant to replace us if we failed. A second chance. Not for the species, but for the idea of humanity. A god in armor, sculpted to carry forward what we couldn't. That's when Voss made the call. She didn't destroy it. She didn't turn it off. She walked into the control chamber and spoke 4 words into the command relay. We're not done yet. And something changed. The lights in the chamber flared white. Goliath moved. Not fully. Just a hand. Just a tilt of the head. But enough. Enough to send a ripple of fear through every resistance base when they saw the footage. Because now the question wasn't whether we could control Goliath. The question was, would it choose us at all? The signal shouldn't have existed. By all logic, Black Mesa should have been dust. Goliath should have stayed buried. But it did exist. And now? Now the architects knew. Because barely 72 hours after Goliath stirred, the atmosphere cracked. A new class of enemy dropped from orbit. Not drones, not spires. These were different, bigger, smarter, hunted in packs. They didn't just destroy infrastructure. They went straight for command centers, for leaders, for symbols. They were here to decapitate humanity's soul. But they didn't expect Goliath. The first battle was near Denver, a command hub, half underground, half torn from past raids. 3 architect colossi hit it at once, each the size of a cathedral, built like insects crossed with skyscrapers. But then Goliath arrived, dropped from low orbit like a meteor. No parachutes, no warnings, just impact. The crater swallowed 2 city blocks. Windows blew out 50 miles away. And when the dust cleared, Goliath stood in the center, eyes burning, hands clenched. And for the first time, the colossi hesitated. Because this wasn't a human. This was a myth made flesh. The fight didn't last long. Goliath didn't use weapons. It was the weapon. It moved like something remembering how to breathe. Fluid. Final. 1 architect colossus impaled. 1 crushed beneath a seismic shockwave. The last tried to flee and was caught mid-leap, torn from the sky like a bird ripped from its flock. The footage went viral across every resistance node. Even underground bunkers without proper comms found a way to play it. No words, no commentary, just 30 seconds of footage over and over again. A machine born of old human fear, crushing the future's worst nightmare. They called it the machine that remembers us. Because Goliath didn't just fight, it protected. It placed its frame between the colossi and the command bunker. It absorbed blows that would have glassed an entire city. It made a choice, and that choice echoed louder than any weapon we'd ever fired. Alaravos, watching from a secure uplink, said just one thing: we're not obsolete. We're just evolving. And the world listened. Because Goliath wasn't the end of humanity. It was proof that we still had teeth, that we could reach into the past, grab what terrified us most, and turn it into fire. The signal that shouldn't exist. It reminded us of something vital, that the past, the present, the ghosts we tried to bury, none of them are done with us. And when the world burns, it's not just what we build that matters. It's what we choose to remember. There are places where history is carved, not written, where you don't read what happened. You feel it in the stone, in the bones, in the echoes that never really leave. Iron Deep was one of those places, a city beneath a mountain, forged, quite literally, to outlive the sky. It started as a mining colony during the early energy wars, back when humanity was still fighting itself, unaware that something far worse was watching. Then came the first architect strikes. The surface became a graveyard, and Iron Deep became a refuge, a labyrinth of steel tunnels and fusion cores, shielded by the planet's crust, reinforced with every kind of desperation we had left. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't hopeful, but it endured. And when the rest of the world went quiet, Iron Deep was still humming, still digging, still building. It was the last fortress, and the enemy finally noticed. They didn't come from above. Not this time. The architects learned, adapted. They came through the ground, or into the mountain like worms. Quiet at first, surgical. It wasn't a battle, not at the start. It was a siege, one slow, steady breath after another, tightening around the heart of the last human stronghold. And when the first support tunnel collapsed, killing 38 engineers in an instant, we finally understood. They weren't here to fight. They were here to starve us out. Command was fractured, supplies thin, oxygen scrubbers overworked and dying. But in Iron Deep, no one broke. They couldn't afford to. There were over 40,000 civilians down there. Families, old folks, children born underground who'd never seen real sunlight, artists who still painted by candlelight, scientists who whispered formulas like lullabies. And at the center of it all, leading the defense, was General Kaido Ren, a man made of silence and scar tissue. He didn't give speeches. He gave orders, and people followed them because he was the kind of leader who didn't care if he made it out. He only cared that we did. When the siege entered its third week, morale started to crack. People slept in shifts, ate once a day, drank recycled condensation like it was holy water. There were whispers, always whispers. But something strange happened too. Poets started etching lines into the steel walls. Still here, stone doesn't bend. If they want us, they better bring a shovel. The people of Iron Deep didn't crumble. They dug in. And General Kaido? He was already preparing for something the architects hadn't seen in centuries. A countersiege. In the lowest sector of Iron Deep, Sector 13, there was a shaft no one used anymore. Too unstable, too deep, officially sealed. Unofficially, it became the staging point. Old mining rigs were reactivated. Not sleek war machines, not mechs or drones, just rusted monsters. Steam-powered drills with teeth like gods. Some still ran on diesel, some coughed fire when they moved, but they worked. Kaido's idea was simple. If they're going to bury us, then we dig out their heart. He wanted to take the fight to them, not on the surface, not in the skies, but underground, in the tunnels where they thought we were weak, where they thought we were just animals in a cage. They were wrong. The counteroffensive launched on the 28th day. For rigged teams, 30 volunteers each, all of them armed with plasma cutters, homemade mines, and a stubbornness that bordered on insanity. They didn't wear uniforms, just pressure suits patched 100 times and helmets scrawled with names of the dead. No war cries, no orchestras, just the sound of drills and breathing. The tunnels were tight, hot, the air metallic and wrong. Architect growths twisted from the stone, black roots that hissed and bled when cut. They were close to something big. And then they saw it, the heart, not literal, not mechanical, but it was alive. A nest, if you could call it that, dug into the bedrock, a living fusion of biomass and alloy, pulsing, breathing, hundreds of smaller architect forms connected to it by thick cables and sinew, like drones fused to a single nervous system. It was how they communicated, how they spread, a relay point underground, hidden from the skies. And now we were inside it. The volunteers didn't hesitate. They placed every charge, every mine, every ounce of hatred they had left. The team leader, Yara Singh, age 26, a former geologist turned demolitionist, recorded a message. It wasn't long. We dig because we believe. If you find this, keep digging, not down, forward. Then she hit the trigger. The mountain shook. Back in Iron Deep, people thought the world was ending. They felt the quake in their teeth. Light fixtures exploded. Power went out. But then, the noise stopped. And for the first time in 29 days, the sensors showed something they hadn't seen since the siege began. Nothing. No movement. No energy readings. No biosigns. The architects were gone. General Kaido didn't celebrate. He walked to the wrecked shaft, looked down into the smoke, and saluted, because he knew what it cost. 30 volunteers didn't come back, but the siege was broken. Iron Deep had survived. The story of that counteroffensive spread like wildfire through the resistance network. Not because it was flashy, but because it was pure. No orbital strikes, no AI reinforcements, no legendary superweapons, just drills, sweat, and defiance in the dark. And those 3 words Yara left behind. Keep digging forward. They became the new rallying cry, a reminder that sometimes the only way out is through. Iron Deep rebuilt, slowly, painfully, but they didn't just patch walls. They started printing maps, tunnels, blueprints, directions to every buried spire, every suspected relay node the architects might be hiding under the crust. They weren't a fortress anymore. They were a vanguard, diggers with fury in their lungs and steel in their veins. And Earth? Earth began to breathe again. Years later, when the war finally ended and monuments were built from the ruins, one stood above the rest, a pillar of stone and metal, rising from what remained of Iron Deep. No statue, no face, just a plaque, etched into it. The last words spoken before the detonation. Not down, forward. Because that's the thing about humanity. We don't just resist. We tunnel through the impossible. We find air where there is none. And we make light in places that were never meant to see it. There are voices that echo long after they've stopped speaking. Some are etched into stone, some buried in memory. But every once in a while, a voice comes from beyond reason, beyond light, beyond the war we thought we understood. This story begins not with a battle, but with a song. It was first heard in the Kuiper Belt, a faint rhythm pulsing through the static, almost like a hum, not artificial, not mechanical, and certainly not random. The outpost that picked it up, Station Mira, wasn't even military, just a ragged listening post staffed by 2 astrophysicists, one retired Navy comms officer, and a janitor who swore he could hear ghosts and white noise. They didn't know what they'd found, not really, but they knew it wasn't ours. And more importantly, it wasn't theirs either. The song didn't match any known architect frequency, no modulation patterns, no traceable energy signature, just 6 notes, repeating over and over, low, melancholy, beautiful in the loneliest way possible. The kind of sound that didn't pierce the ear, it lingered in the chest, like something half-remembered. At first, High Command dismissed it as an anomaly. They had bigger problems, more spires falling from orbit, more architect siege forms evolving in real time. But then the signal changed, not louder, not stronger, more focused. It began to answer us. When the Mira crew tried broadcasting a pulse, just a basic hello in structured frequency tones, they got a return pattern, not an echo, not a reflection, a response. The 6 notes shifted to 7, then 8, and woven between the tones were words, not spoken, not written, but something deeper, like thoughts pressed between wavelengths. And when they decoded it, the first translation sent chills through every technician watching the screen. We were watching too. The resistance scrambled to figure out what that meant. Was this another architect trick? A trap? A false flag? Some believed it was a rogue AI. Maybe even something built by Earth, long ago, lost beyond Pluto's reach, and now coming back with something new. Others believed something more radical, that the architects weren't the only ones evaluating us, that someone or something had been waiting, just outside our vision, watching the test play out. And now? Now they were speaking. Command activated Project Janus within 72 hours. The goal was simple: build a communication relay strong enough to sustain 2-way transmission at Kuiper range, without giving away our full planetary coordinates. It had to be fast, had to be hidden, had to work. But nothing about this war had ever been easy. And this wasn't war. This was contact. The construction site for the relay was chosen carefully. An orbital debris field near the dark side of Saturn's moon, Iapetus, covered in electromagnetic noise, shrouded by ice and dead satellites. It took 6 days, 40 engineers, 3 near mutinies, 1 reactor overload. But it worked. When the relay came online, it sent one message across the void. Who are you? There was a pause, not seconds, minutes, almost like whoever or whatever was out there had to remember how to speak. And then came the reply. Not gods, not masters, not your enemy. We are the ones they failed. It hit like a thunderclap. The architects, it turned out, weren't the first. They had done this before. Other species, other worlds, other wars. And somewhere out there, beyond light, beyond gravity, someone had survived, not as conquerors, not as kings, but as witnesses. The voice, as it came to be called, never gave a name, never described its form, never told us what it looked like, only what it remembered. And what it remembered was painful. In a message that took 8 hours to fully decrypt, the voice told a story that haunted every bunker it reached. A civilization born in the dust of stars. Curious, fierce, full of wonder. Sound familiar? They grew, built, reached beyond their homeworld. And when they did, the architects came. Not in anger, not with fire, but with questions. Questions masked as gifts. Tests disguised as choice. They offered ascension, a path to survival. All you had to do was surrender what made you unpredictable. Your chaos, your grief, your hope. They refused, and for that, they were erased. Except one remnant, one seed, one fragment of mind preserved in quantum resonance, cast into the dark with only a song to remember itself by. That was the voice, not a survivor, exactly. More like a ghost, a message in a bottle drifting through the black sea of the cosmos, waiting for someone else to find it, to understand, and maybe to finish what it couldn't. At first, Earth didn't know what to do with this knowledge. Some were inspired, others terrified. But in hidden command centers and makeshift war rooms, a new philosophy took root. If the architects are a test, maybe the voice is the answer. Because if someone else had resisted and left behind this, maybe humanity wasn't doomed to fail. Maybe we were meant to pass, but it wouldn't come easy. The voice began to teach us, not weapons, not technology, patterns, the way the architects think, their logic, their blind spots, the seams in their design. It couldn't give us blueprints, but it could give us language. It showed us how to sing back, because the war wasn't just being fought with bullets and bombs. It was being fought with perception, with the way we saw ourselves. The voice believed that if we could reshape our identity, not erase it, not surrender it, but refine it, then maybe, just maybe, we could break the loop. It started with a melody, broadcast into the architect relay in orbit. 6 tones, then 7, then 8, and on the last note, silence. Not destruction, not interference, just nothing. And in that nothing, for the first time, the architect relay stopped transmitting. Not because it was destroyed, because it was listening. The voice didn't give us victory. It gave us something rare, a question, one we had to answer for ourselves. Could we still be human and still evolve? Could we carry our fire into the dark without burning ourselves to ash? The voice couldn't tell us that. It could only remind us, you are not alone in defiance, but only you can choose to remain human. After that day, we never heard from it again. No more songs, no more messages, just the echo of what it left behind. But the resistance didn't forget. Every soldier on the front line knew what it meant. Every general saw the pattern. Every child born under bunkers hummed the tune in their sleep. 6 notes, then 7, then silence. And if you listen closely, really closely, you'll still hear it. In the rhythm of gunfire, in the cadence of resistance speeches, in the quiet heartbeat between battles. A voice that was never ours, but believed in us anyway. There are moments in history where everything goes quiet, right before the fire. Moments when the world holds its breath, not because it's afraid, but because it knows. This is it. This is the line, and we are the ones who drew it. This chapter isn't about survival. It's not about odds or strategy. This is about what happens when you're out of time, out of chances, and still refuse to kneel. They called it the last surge. A full-scale, final strike from the architects. No cloaked scouts this time. No psychological games. No patience. Just raw annihilation. A coordinated assault on every remaining resistance hub, relay node, and civilian sanctuary on Earth. All at once, it started with the sky. The moon fractured at 0400 UTC. Not shattered, fractured. Split like porcelain. A long, quiet wound across its surface, leaking light. Then came the black ships, thousands of them. Not the elegant, insectoid horrors we'd come to know. These were different, wider, deeper. They moved like machines that had learned what fear was and decided to erase the concept from the universe. Their shape didn't matter. What mattered was what followed. The skies turned red over Europe, green over the Pacific, purple above the poles. Color bled where it shouldn't have. Space-time groaned, and Earth, all of Earth, understood. This wasn't a siege. This was judgment. At the heart of the storm stood New Alexandria, the last global resistance nerve center, built inside what used to be the Andes Mountains. A bunker city powered by sun cores and wrapped in carbon armor. It was the mind of what remained of humanity. And now, it was the target. the place where our species would either make it stand or leave behind silence. Alara Voss stood on the command balcony, eyes tired, shoulders squared, armor cracked and patched more times than she could count. She didn't give speeches, not anymore. She just looked at her people, techs, medics, soldiers, artists with rifles, and nodded, and that was enough. Because in that nod was everything. We've come too far to be anything but fire. Down below, Goliath stood dormant, like a statue built from everything humanity feared and refused to bow to. It hadn't moved since the Denver strike, hadn't responded to commands, until now. As the Architect fleet descended, its visor flickered, faint, blue, then white. One slow rotation of the head toward the mountain sky. It knew, and with a rumble that shook the earth, it woke up. The defense grid lit up. Railguns hummed. Shield generators screamed under pressure. Drones rose like flocks of metal birds, painting the air with contrails and purpose. But it wouldn't be enough. Everyone knew that. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to show what kind of species was worth remembering. In the lowest level of New Alexandria, a boy named Micah, age 9, sat in the medical wing holding his sister's hand. She was unconscious, breathing shallow, burn marks across her legs from the last orbital flare. He didn't cry. He hummed a song. 6 notes, then 7, then silence. Up above, the first wave hit. Spires plunged into the mountainside like daggers from orbit. Architect ground units poured out, fluid, fast, brutal. No fear, no retreat. And the resistance met them with everything. Molten fire, directed EMPs, electromagnetic blade lines that turned close combat into meat grinders. The battle wasn't strategy. It was a heartbeat. Boom, strike, burn, fall, rise again. One of the frontline captains, Rafi El-Sad, former linguist turned tank commander, was asked over the radio how long they could hold. He laughed, said, "Long enough for the world to remember we didn't go out quiet." Then his channel went dark, but the memory stayed. Goliath entered the field at 0615. With one seismic step, it caved in 3 enemy spires. Its movements weren't fast. They were final, like a storm that's already decided who survives and who doesn't. It fought with fists and fury and an old, unknowable purpose. But then the architects adapted. They brought something new, a form we hadn't seen, tall, angular, like liquid obsidian folded around rage. It descended like a god, landing in a blast that shattered rock and pride alike. And when it spoke, in pulses, not words, we heard it in our heads. Unstable species, evaluation, incomplete, initiate terminal correction, and Goliath turned to face it. No orders, no commands, just will. The 2 titans clashed beneath the broken sky, one born of human desperation, the other of alien calculus. And for every punch, every blow traded between them, the mountains trembled. This wasn't about defense anymore. This was declaration, a message etched into the bones of the earth. We are still here. Come and break us. Inside the command center, Alara watched it all unfold. Blood down her cheek, left arm bandaged, right hand on the last functioning comms interface. She opened a wide-frequency broadcast, not to issue a retreat, not to call for backup, to speak. And the entire planet heard her voice. To anyone still fighting, this is not the end. This is the measure of what we are, of what we refuse to become. We don't need to win. We just need to burn bright enough that they never forget us. In the end, Goliath didn't win. It didn't need to. It took the enemy's god form with it. Both of them falling into the molten core opened beneath the battlefield. A fireball that swallowed half a mountain. And the scream that came from the architect network wasn't pain. It was confusion. Because for the first time, they didn't understand why we didn't submit, why we fought past the point of logic, why we sang in the face of oblivion. And that was the turning point. The last surge broke them, not through strength, but through meaning, through humanity. The architect fleet fractured, began to withdraw. Some vanished, some imploded, some just stopped. And New Alexandria stood, ravaged, bloodied, but breathing. The boy, Micah, was later found in a rubble pocket alive, still holding his sister's hand, still humming that same haunting melody. 6 notes, then 7, then silence. And when he looked up at the medic pulling him out, he whispered, "They didn't take our song." Because when Earth burned brightest, it wasn't a scream. It was a flare, one last impossible fire across the dark. Proof that we weren't just data points or savages or anomalies. We were human, and we chose defiance. With open eyes and open hands. They say when the night is at its darkest, that's when the stars burn brightest. And for humanity, that night had been endless. But it was in that darkness, the kind that swallows worlds whole, where we made our choice to light the dark. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about legacy, about carving our story into the bones of the universe so fiercely, so defiantly, that even silence would remember us. We didn't just fight to live. We fought to be. The battlefields had run cold. The cities, scorched. The survivors, fewer by the day. But from the ashes, a new fire rose. Not just Goliath, that machine born from our fear and hope, but us, humanity, in every broken, beautiful form. The last strongholds broadcast messages across shattered networks. Songs, stories, promises of what was lost and what we refused to lose. Across the void, those signals reached distant worlds, not just as warnings, but as invitations. Because the voice beyond the stars, the mysterious song we once heard drifting in the Kuiper Belt, was not alone. There were others, other remnants, other echoes of civilizations that had faced the same darkness. And now, hearing our light, they stirred. Alara Voss stood once more, not on a command balcony, but at the edge of a new dawn. Her armor worn, her face marked by battle and loss, but her eyes still blazing with something unbreakable. The world had changed, yes, but she knew this truth more clearly than ever. We are the sum of every scar, every victory, every moment we chose to stand when falling seemed easier. On the ruins of Earth's last great city, the survivors gathered, not as scattered souls, but as a single pulse, a heartbeat, a flame passed hand to hand. And the fire wasn't just metaphor. They built it literally. Bonfires blazing beneath starless skies. Symbols of life and resistance. A signal to the cosmos that Earth was not silent. Meanwhile, deep within Black Mesa, Goliath stood sentinel. No longer dormant. No longer alone. The machine that remembered humanity was now part of it. A guardian. A testament. The embodiment of a species that refused to fade quietly. The architect threat was diminished but not gone. They lurked beyond, watching, calculating, waiting. But they had learned something too, that this wasn't just a war of weapons, it was a war of will. And humanity's will was now legendary. Stories of the last surge, the siege of Iron Deep, the voice beyond the stars, they became myths. Not myths that erased history, but myths that preserved it. Tales told to children born in bunkers, whispered around fires, sung in the ruins. Micah, the boy who once hummed that haunting melody in the medical wing of New Alexandria, grew up to become a symbol of hope. He never forgot the song, nor the silence that followed. He taught others to listen, not just with ears, but with their hearts, because that's what humanity had learned. To hear the silence between the notes, that's where the real story lives. The universe is vast, cold, unforgiving, but humanity, flawed, stubborn, fierce, had become something else. A light in the endless dark. The final transmission from Earth's resistance was not a plea, not a surrender, but a promise. We lit the dark, and we will keep lighting it. For every soul lost, for every star yet to rise, for every moment we dared to be more than dust. And with that promise, the screen went dark, not as an end, but as the beginning. Because in the end, what defines us isn't the battles we fight or the wars we survive. It's the light we choose to shine when everything around us is dark. We didn't just win. We became the fire that no darkness could consume. The story of humanity is not one of surrender. It's a story of defiance, of hope, of the unyielding will to be remembered. And long after the stars forget their names, the flame we lit will still burn. You'd think fire would be our enemy. It burned our cities, lit the skies when the world cracked open. But no, it wasn't the fire that broke us. It was the cold of defeat, the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't go away, even after the smoke clears. The kind of cold you feel when you realize you're losing, not just battles, but entire countries, whole histories. But deep in the heart of Appalachia, in those misty old mountains, there was still warmth. Not the gentle kind, not the kind that comforts you. No, this was the furious kind. The mountains were supposed to be safe. That was the plan. Retreat to the highlands, regroup, rearm. Nature's fortress. Steep slopes, hard rock. Winding paths too narrow for the architect's larger constructs. For a while, it worked. People flocked there in droves. Soldiers, scientists, farmers, children. They built bunkers out of collapsed mines and rigged old logging trucks with plasma coils and scrap armor. Whole communities lived beneath the trees, hiding under roots like foxes while the world burned around them. But safety? Safety was always temporary. Because the architects adapted, we thought they only fought from above. Drones, orbitals, high-altitude strikes. But then the harvest spires came. God, even now, just the name still makes your skin crawl. They didn't land like ships. They burrowed, fell from the sky like javelins and sank into the earth. At first, they did nothing. Just stood there, monoliths made of bone-white alloys and shifting black vines, humming low and slow like breathing. Then they began to feed. They drank heat from the soil, moisture from the air. Trees around them withered. Animals died or changed, twisted into chittering things that didn't blink. The ground turned gray. And worst of all, people started disappearing. Whole outposts would go silent. No signs of struggle, just gone. By the time we understood what the spires were doing, mining energy, rewriting biology, it was too late. Appalachia was falling. So we did what humans always do when we're cornered. We stopped trying to survive and started trying to make them hurt. They called it Operation Break the Sky. No one remembers who named it, but the name stuck because it sounded like exactly what we wanted to do. Make the heavens bleed. The resistance pulled together everything we had, which, honestly, wasn't much. No working satellites, no orbital launch systems, no international command. But we had rage, and we had engineers. You see, something strange happens to engineers in wartime. They go quiet, focused, dangerous. We took mining rigs and bolted on tank treads, turned coal crushers into impromptu railguns, welded flamethrowers onto grain harvesters. There were entire war machines running on scavenged batteries and hope. We weren't building an army. We were building a temper tantrum, a last scream before the light went out. And it worked. It began at dawn. A pale sun rose over the ridge, cutting across the mist. The spires had begun pulsing overnight, shedding dark mist that made the birds fall from the trees. It was like they knew we were coming. Our attack wave came in low, mud-covered, humming barely held together tracks. Every vehicle had one of two things painted on the side: a crude human skull or the phrase "killable," because that's what we were trying to prove. We didn't need to win the war. We just needed to prove they could die. When the first volley hit, it sounded like a mountain was coughing up its lungs. Boom, boom, boom. Rigs fired electrified steel rods into the nearest spire. The rods pierced the outer shell, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the spire screamed. A deep, what howl that made your knees shake and your eyes water. The spire twisted, as if it were alive, black tendrils writhing from the wound. It wasn't metal. It was something else, some unholy mix of organ and alloy. Drones spilled from it, fast and erratic. They didn't fly. They skittered, claws clicking against air, eyes like frozen voids. They tore into our front line. 2 rigs went down in seconds. One exploded. The other, we never found the crew. But the line held. And that's the part people forget when they talk about Break the Sky. They remember the spires falling, the explosions, the fireworks. What they forget is the line. The humans who stood there, dirt in their teeth, blood in their boots, firing until the barrels glowed red, screaming curses in 20 languages. There were moments of silence in that chaos. Moments where a soldier would duck behind a boulder, reload, and stare out at the battlefield and think, we are not supposed to be winning this. But they kept fighting, because by then, it wasn't about survival anymore. It was about revenge. The turning point came when the spire cracked, not exploded, not collapsed, cracked from the inside. A shockwave burst outward. Everyone ducked for cover. And from that fracture, a torrent of black ichor sprayed into the air like blood from a ruptured artery. It hit the trees, the rocks, the sky. The forest caught fire, except it wasn't a normal fire. The flames didn't burn red or orange. They burned blue, cold, howling blue. The spire began to fold in on itself, twitching like something trying to die but forgetting how. Then it fell. The sound it made wasn't a crash. It was a groan, like a planet exhaling its last breath. And when the dust settled, when the screaming stopped, when the smoke cleared, there was nothing left, just ash and us, still standing. They say the battle lasted 6 days, but to the people there, it felt longer. Time didn't work the same in that place anymore. Gravity bent near the dead spires. Rain fell in slow motion. You could hear music that no one was playing, but we didn't care. Because for the first time since the architects arrived, we made one of them fall. The news spread fast, through old radio towers, tapped fiber lines, even word of mouth on foot. And wherever the story reached, One word bloomed like wildfire. Killable. It was like lighting a match in a pitch-black cave. Suddenly, the war wasn't just about hiding. It was about fighting back. Resistance cells started popping up in places we thought had gone dark forever. Nairobi, Caracas, Detroit, even Antarctica, where a group of scientists wired their research outpost into a signal jammer that blanked out an entire fleet of architect drones. And each time a spire fell, someone would paint the word in blood or mud or neon across the wreckage. Killable. It wasn't just a word. It was a spell, a prayer made of teeth and fury. Captain Voss, still recovering from the Manhattan op, watched the footage of the Appalachia assault from a hospital cot in an underground facility in Kansas. She didn't speak, just stared at the flickering screen. Then, quietly, to no one in particular, she said, "It bleeds, so it can die." Good. And with that, she stood up, still bandaged, still coughing blood, and asked for a weapon. We lost a lot of people in Appalachia, some of our best, some of our loudest. But we took something back that day, something more valuable than territory. We took certainty. We proved the architects weren't gods. They weren't invincible. They could bleed. And maybe, just maybe, they could lose. That was the moment the war changed. Not from a tactical standpoint, not yet, but from a spiritual one. We weren't just survivors anymore. We weren't just stubborn. We were hunters. And the stars? They started watching back.